Hi everyone, welcome to the 2020 Student Leadership Summit virtual event. My name is Phony.
I'm Morgan.
And we are your Student Leadership Summit coordinators.
I'm currently studying business and marketing education, and so far I've been working on the communications and marketing aspect for this event.
And I'm in global studies and I work with our campus partners.
The Student Leadership Summit is an opportunity for students to interact with other students interested in leadership and involvement. In the past, the Student Leadership Summit has been a one-day event for students to attend. With the given circumstances, we've decided to create an alternative virtual event. Our goal for this year's Student Leadership Summit is to create conversation centered around anti-racism and racial justice in regards to student leadership development.
We have been aware of and closely following some of the most recent acts of violence against Black people in our country. We felt that it's especially important to include anti-racism in our program. As leaders, we must step up when we see acts of racism and injustice. We want students to understand their role in systemic racism and intentionally work to be anti-racist. Race plays a role in every part of our society and we all contribute to it, whether unconsciously or not. It takes a lot of intentionality and awareness to disrupt racism when we see it. In this video, and the guide that will be provided for you, you'll be given information on how to take an active role in anti-racism. The vision for the Student Leadership Summit is
allow meaningful dialogue that is inclusive to different identities that comprise the U of M community.
Leveraging personal strengths to engage in this conversation and understanding how each of us can contribute.
Gain understanding about the three competency areas, which includes learning and reasoning, interpersonal interaction, and civic responsibility.
Understand intersectionality in terms of leadership development. Intersectionality, a term coined by the civil rights advocate Kimberly Crenshaw, is a term used to understand how different social and political identities a person has can intersect and form disadvantages that are different from the disadvantages formed by singular pieces of identity. It's important to understand your different identities and the role it plays in society so that you can develop as a leader.
Form a sense of community among participants. In this alternative event that we've created, we hope to give participants a preview of what this year's summit will be like and an additional resource guide centered around social justice and anti-racism.
In this video, you'll be hearing from 3 speakers who will go over each specific leadership competency. This is to get you thinking and as a preview for the Student Leadership Summit that will be happening in the future. But first, you'll be hearing from our director, Aaron Asmunson, as he gives an overview of the student leadership competencies and introduces our speakers.
Hi, my name is Aaron Asmunson. I am the Program Director for Leadership Enrichment Programs, which is a unit within the Office for Student Affairs. We focus on providing co-curricular leadership development opportunities available to all students on campus. And the virtual Student Leadership Summit today is one of those opportunities, and I'm excited to be part of it with you. Our hope is to create opportunity to learn more intentionally and deeply about the intersection of student leadership development, anti-racism, and racial justice. From a leadership development lens, we are focusing our learning and dialogue in the Student Leadership Competencies Model developed by Dr. Corey C. Miller. The Student Leadership Competencies Model specifically pulls together information that is utilized across sectors to highlight the knowledge, skills, values, and behavior for individuals to contribute successfully as part of a team and to contribute to positive social change. There are so many different ways to define leadership, and there is no one right way for every situation. Our hope in utilizing a student leadership competencies framework is that we can broadly consider the diverse array of competencies necessary for leadership to happen across contexts and using a common shared language of what those competencies are. As defined in the model itself, there are actually 60 competencies overall compiled together that fall into a total of 8 categories. For more information about all of the competencies and all of the categories, as well as the model itself, you can refer to the resource guide we will highlight at the end of this video. For the purposes of our presentation today, we will focus on 3 competency categories that we believe relate directly to creating learning and dialogue around utilizing leadership skills towards anti-racist actions, and help us center our leadership work on the vision that Morgan and Phony highlighted at the beginning of the video. Those 3 categories are learning and reasoning, interpersonal interaction, and civic responsibility. Within each of these categories, we find the specific competencies we can reflect on, assess our abilities, and prepare action plans for growth. Our 3 speakers in this presentation will each highlight one of these 3 competency areas by sharing their own thoughts, anecdotes, and lived experiences as leaders in racial justice and anti-racism in our community. As the speakers share their stories of utilizing these competencies in their own journeys, we hope that it sparks reflection, questions, and dialogue for you in your own lived experience. Ultimately, how can you more intentionally engage through a leadership lens with anti-racism and racial justice initiatives? Our first speaker is Dr. Abdul Omari, and he will address the learning and reasoning category. The leadership competencies specifically that are included in this category are research, other perspectives, reflection and application, systems thinking, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, idea generation, problem solving, and decision making. Dr. Abdul M. Omari holds a BA in Global Studies, a Master's of Public Policy, and a PhD in Comparative and International Development Education from the University of Minnesota. Abdul's research is focused on the perceptions of mentoring and the role of cultural intelligence within mentoring relationships. For several years, he has taught leadership courses for college students. Abdul is the founder of AMO Enterprise, which focuses on leadership development and the inseparable ties to equity, inclusion, and diversity. Abdul is devoted to civic and public service. He served 6 years as an elected member of the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota and currently serves on the University of Minnesota Foundation Board of Trustees, the Board of Directors for Achieve Minneapolis, and Civic Eagle. Abdul has been featured in Minnesota Business Magazine's Young Entrepreneurs. In 2019, he was selected as one of 10 people from the Twin Cities to participate in the Young American Leaders Program at Harvard Business School. Abdul has also been recognized as one of Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal's 40 Under 40. And Abdul is a proud native of Minneapolis, Minnesota, with immigrant parents from Kenya and Jordan, and is a sucker for a good TV show and an avid sports fan.
When I think about leadership and the multiple dynamics that are associated with it, the first thing that is important is that we always show up with ourselves, and we show up with who we are. We examine the ways in which we experience the world and where that comes from. And there's a whole lot of learning that comes with that. It's learning about yourself, it's researching the ways in which your parents grew up, or your guardians, or whomever it is that may have brought you to the place that you're at now. And that process of learning and listening is also a constant toggle between learning, listening, and reasoning. And then when we start to interact and work with other people in leadership dynamics, the fact that we have gone through that journey of personal development and personal experiential processes, we begin to think about, and we begin to learn about, and we begin to ask those questions and listen to other people's stories. And when we listen to their stories, we then begin to navigate the ways in which we should act and how we might bring people into the decision-making process. We think about the experiences and the stories that other people have had, so that when we go into a decision-making process, whether it's small or large, simple or mighty, we are able to examine and reason in ways that will help us navigate those situations so that we can move the world in the ways that we see fit for the future. As we think about anti-racist work, as we think about breaking down systemic racism and oppression, we have to consistently and constantly recognize that everybody has to be in that process. And in order to move into and work on anti-racist work, anti-sexist work, we need racist and sexist to be a part of that conversation. Some might be so far gone that we just can't bring them along, but those that are in this world that haven't had the chance to be exposed or have willfully pushed away from it, we need them to enter into the conversation. And without listening, without learning, without reasoning, we won't be able to do that. I mentioned that while also recognizing that it's so very important that when we are in conversation and when we are trying to move people in the directions that we see fit, we must never lose who we are. And we must never stop in a moment where we say, I'm going to compromise beyond my belief, beyond the core and personal values with which we hold, and never lose that identity and the identifiers that make up who we are. That is a key component in leadership. It's a key component in listening and learning. I recently wrote and composed a piece about my time as a regent here at the University of Minnesota when I led the presidential search for our now president, Joan Gable. And when I originally penned this white paper, I had titled it something along the lines of Reflections from a Millennial Who Led a Research One Presidential Search. And I later changed the title to Reflections from a Black Millennial Who Led a Research One Presidential Search. And it's very important that we add some identifiers that are important, particularly when we're talking about identifiers and individuals who've been left out of the conversation for so very long. So whether that's you, who might be a woman, whether that's one of us who might be young, whether it's one of us who might be transgender, we must make sure that we are recognizing that when we have those identifiers and we're in those places of leadership to make those differences, that we recognize that we brought a certain level of talent because of those identifiers. And we must use those identifiers in a way that is not a deficit, but rather a talent that shows up in ways that informs the decision we make and how we act. And that lesson, as I reflect on adding that one word, Black, makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I had people who wrote me saying, why did you have to say that you're Black? And I thought to myself, why didn't they ask me why I had to say I was a millennial? Or why didn't they ask me why I identified in the white paper that my parents are immigrants? But this word makes people uncomfortable. But as I mentioned earlier, we cannot shy away from that talent that is brought by being Black. That talent that is brought by being Latinx. That talent that is brought by being transgender. That talent that is brought by being a woman. That talent that is brought by being a younger person than is typically in the decision-making process. So my hope is that as we move through these situations of leadership, small or large, that we continue to learn, that we continue to listen, that we continue to reason, but never lose who we are, never lose our core values, and lean into those talents that you have that in so many ways, in unfortunate ways, are not looked at as talent, but rather deficits. You are talented. Own that. Peace.
Our second speaker, Aaron Sharkey, will address the interpersonal interaction category. The leadership competencies in this category include productive relationships, appropriate interaction, helping others, empathy, mentoring, motivation, others' contributions, empowerment, providing feedback, supervision, and collaboration. Aaron Sharkey is a writer, artistic organizer, and cultural producer based in Minneapolis. She is the co-founder with Junata Petrus of an experimental arts production collective called Free Black Dirt. Aaron was a Bell Museum resident artist, Loft Mentor Series mentee, Vona Fellow, Jerome Travel and Study grantee, Minnesota State Arts Board grantee, MRAC Next Step Fund grantee, and Gibbons Foundation Fellow. She is editing A Darker Wilderness, a forthcoming anthology of Black nature writing for Milkweed Editions. Aaron teaches at Metro State University and with Minnesota Prison Writers Workshop. Currently, she is working in concert with other Black organizers to respond to COVID-19 and lead in this moment of uprising.
Hi, y'all. I'm Aaron Sharkey. I'm a cultural producer and a community organizer. And I have been doing that work since I was in college, maybe even before that. And I wanted to tell you a little story about the way that I got to the position that I'm in right now. So several years ago, right after I was done with college, I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, a domestic Peace Corps worker, and I was assigned to Buffalo, New York. And I worked on an urban farm there. I worked and lived in this 2-acre plot of land with teenagers growing food, and so we grew vegetables and herbs, and we had fish growing and chickens and ducks. And it was this we were building this utopia right in this neighborhood. We were giving young people jobs and valuable skills. We were addressing some disparities in terms of education. And like I said, I was living on the farm, and one day I woke up it felt like everything was on fire. And we looked out our window, and the building that we'd been having our offices in was ablaze. It was the biggest fire I've ever seen. And as that fire was put out and all of the embers were smoking, we discovered that the police had arrested a young person in our community for arson. And a few boys just too young to be in our program were arrested, and one of them, the eldest one, who was only 13, was charged as an adult in that case. So as we were recovering from the fire, we went to court to see what would happen. And really quickly, I felt in me a change from what felt like victim status, from like something had happened to us and something that I cared about very deeply was destroyed, into feeling like I was torn. I felt like I was looking at this kid and I felt like, what is this, like, how is he gonna handle the consequences of this experience? And so as a group, we decided to encourage the court system to let us do something differently in this case. And so we initiated a restorative justice, transformative justice process. And over many, many, many months and many, many conversations, really hard ones, we were able to create community with this young person, and together to make a plan for him to restore some of the things that had been damaged by the fire. And all of that happened in relationship. And I was really inspired by that experience. I sort of felt like we had won something. You know, this young man, you know, got a skill. He was doing repairs and home improvements with another nonprofit in our neighborhood. He's like now a member of the plumbing union. He's an incredible contributing member of a neighborhood. And I thought we had done an incredible job, and I wanted to understand more about it. So I went into deep study for several years around what is police abolition, what is prison abolition, what are different ways that we could keep each other safe, deal with conflict in our communities. And it really wasn't until this year that I started to think about how that could be not just a far-fetched, really far away dream, but something that we could actually achieve. And I think that's what's been going on in my community and with my fellow organizers, my peer organizers, has been really having conversations about what abolition could look like. And all of that happened since the murder of George Floyd. And you know, I've been organizing in Minneapolis for several years on lots of different fronts, mostly as a cultural producer, so someone who works on arts and arts organizations. And I didn't really know until I was asked to sort of audit my work that it really, all of that was abolition work. I teach creative writing in the prison system with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. I'm interested in reentry. I'm interested in alternatives to incarceration. But I hadn't really thought about it. So one of the things was to really like look at my work and look at the sort of the relationships I'd already built. And then I was called to a table to really, first of all, think about the specific needs of the Black community around COVID-19 and testing and care for folks, because we really saw that numbers were going up for folks in our community, and really identifying inaccessibility of testing. And so we were already sort of assembled on one front. And once George Floyd was murdered and our neighborhood really rose up in response, and the city, again, like my first experience, was burning, right? I, along with several other organizers, were able to hit the ground and run really quickly. And we were able to address some immediate needs, some needs around mutual aid, some needs around housing and food and other sorts of daily needs for folks. And after we were able to do that, we needed to shift gears a bit to think about long-ranging ideas. And again, my training and thinking about restorative justice and transformative justice came back to me. And when my peers started calling for the abolition and the defunding of the police, it felt like a really awesome time to integrate those things together. And what I've really learned in the last several months is that we can't keep each other safe unless we're in relationship with one another. One of the most successful components of the prison industrial complex is that it separates us from one another, and that it puts trust in someone other than us to deal with conflict. And so in any group of people, conflict arises. And especially when we're under stress, especially when we're doing hard things, we're imagining things we haven't imagined before. And that happened with us, right? We had some just interpersonal spats, some things that we hadn't dealt with from years before. The organizing group really had to address our own ways that we've harmed each other or we've been hurt by each other. And I've really come to believe that that is the heart of abolition, is really around trusting that we can address harm, that it's our job to do it, that only happens in relationship, that when we get to know one another, that our harms matter more, and the personality of the people involved and the identities of folks and the complexities of life become more, more challenging and important to consider. And so I have learned over my work for the last 20 years that relationships are the center, and you have to do work on those relationships. And it starts with understanding yourself and understanding your own journey to where you are. What are your hangouts? What is your growth edges? What is the border of your imagination? How do you push past it? How do you see the ways that your own body is holding evidence of the systems that are all intertwined, right? That are so big. How am I holding in my body misogyny or racism or classism, ableism? And it's important to start there, and then to start with our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with the people that we're working with, addressing conflict, understanding, being open to learning about the ways that we're harming each other, to address those, to be accountable to one another. And so I'm excited for all of you on your journeys. I wish you, exciting roads that take you places you didn't expect. And I wish you concentration on your relationships.
Our final speaker, Sun-Young Shin, will address the Civic Responsibility category. The leadership competencies in this category are diversity, others' circumstances, inclusion, social justice, social responsibility, and service. Sun-Young Shin is the author of poetry essay collections Unbearable Splendor, a Minnesota Book Award recipient, Rough and Savage, and Skirt Full of Black, an Asian American Literary Award recipient, all published by Coffee House Press. She is the editor of A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota, and co-editor of Outsiders Within, Writing on Transracial Adoption. Her bilingual Korean-English illustrated children's book is Cooper's Lesson. She is the co-director of Poetry Asylum, which recognizes poetry as a human right, and is an emerging healing practitioner in biodynamic craniosacral therapy and Reiki Master Level 3. She has an MFA from Naropa University and a Master of Arts in Teaching from University of St. Thomas. She lives in Minneapolis.
Hi everyone, I'm Sun-Young Shin, and I'm here to talk a little bit about healing justice. So, what is healing justice? What might it have to do with student leadership, with social movements, with civic responsibility, social responsibility? We need to think about health as a more collective endeavor. Clearly, the pandemic is teaching us in the hardest way that our health is intertwined. And more leaders and organizations are seeing structural racism as, among other things, a devastating public health crisis. And the pandemic has only exacerbated the existing racial disparities. So I hope that we can support you in thinking about social justice through this lens of healing justice. And without healing, we will continue to repeat the same patterns and cause the same or worse harms to one another and ourselves, and to the ecologies that all our lives depend on. So what is healing justice? It's something that I'm learning about too, and I'm following teachers and mentors and colleagues, so I wanted to share a little bit. A leader in this work is Kara Page, who describes herself as a Black feminist, queer, cultural / memory worker, curator, and organizer. And for the past 30 years, she's organized with LGBTQ, GNCI, people of color, and indigenous liberation movements in the US and global South at the intersections of racial, gender, and economic justice, healing justice, and transformative justice. So in terms of young people's leadership around this healing justice, I'm interested in and following the work of the Young Women's Empowerment Project and the Chicago Healing Justice Learning Circle, and they explain healing justice in this way. Healing justice is a framework that identifies how we can holistically respond to and intervene on generational trauma and violence, and to bring collective practices that can impact and transform the consequences of oppression on our bodies, hearts, and minds. Through this framework, we can continue to build political and philosophical convergences of healing inside of liberation movements and organizations. Healing justice means we all deserve to heal on our terms while we confront oppressive systems that get in our way. We honor the trauma and resilience of generations that came before us, and we use interactive daily practices that anyone can do. Healing justice is a reminder to social movements that the concept of action should be expanded to support the self-determination, interdependence, and resilience and resistance of those most impacted by oppression. So part of my work as a writer and educator is to encourage us all to see our social problems, our social challenges, these disparities as problems of relationship, and to encourage us to think about ourselves as related and interdependent. The pandemic has made this more clear than ever. We are definitely in a time of convergence, when many social movements for equality and community self-determination, of living in a regenerative rather than extractive way in relation to other forms of life on the planet, and of working for peace and stability so human beings can flourish. These movements are coming together and seeing that this work cannot be separated. Much of what I know, or attempt to know, is from Black women activists, intellectuals, and artists, such as Audre Lorde and the Combahee River Collective, and so many more, past and present. They are the ones who developed this theory of intersectionality. The climate movement cannot be separate from the movement for racial justice. The gender justice movement cannot be separate from the movement for a living wage and fair housing. We can't have healing unless we're also working on these systems together. I strongly believe each of us is important and each of us can make a difference. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed listening to the speakers.
We encourage you guys to sign up for a full-day event that's anticipated to happen this spring at Kauffman Memorial.
You'll be hearing from the same 3 speakers that spoke at this virtual event and have the chance to engage in virtual dialogue and learning with other campus leaders and alumni. Racism is in every part of our society. We don't expect you as individuals to change our society, but we do expect you to be able to change your community. You have the power to talk to people around you, whether it be family, friends, or random individuals, to speak up when you see injustice. Thank you guys for tuning into this virtual event.